God, thank you so much.
3, 2,
In through grace we are saved.
1. So last week we talked about controlling the tongue. So what it looks like for a believer to control the words that come out of their mouths and to use it to build up and not to destroy. Jesus says in Matthew 12:34 that the mouth will say whatever the heart is full of, right? So that means that in order to tame the tongue, you first have to tame the heart, because that's the source of all of the words, right? But the problem is that we, as humans, are not able to tame our own tongues, because if we were, or not able to tame our own hearts, because if we were, we'd be able to fix our own problems, fix ourselves. But the Bible teaches us otherwise. We're as helpless to fix ourselves as a house is to fix its own foundation. We need a master builder to come in and fix us, and that's Jesus Christ. So the only way that our tongues and our hearts can ever be tamed is by surrendering to Jesus on the cross and what he did for us. So now today what we're going to be talking about is wisdom, which is one of the things that we are given when we surrender completely to Jesus. So oftentimes, when you're talking about the Christian life and becoming a Christian, we tend to focus on the things that we give up, the things that we lose. Well, I can't drink, I can't do drugs, I don't have sex before marriage, I can't hang out with people who do all those things, I can't, and the list just goes on and on of all these don'ts, do nots, thou shalt nots, all the things that you don't want to be a part of. But there's so much that we gain from following Christ. So today we're going to talk about one of those things. James is going to talk about this, and we're going to look at what he has to say about it. So starting in verse 13, let's go ahead and read 13 through 18. It says, "Who is wise and has understanding among you? He should show his works by good conduct with wisdom's gentleness. But if you have bitter envy and selfish ambition in your heart, don't brag and deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where envy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder in every kind of evil. But the wisdom from above is first pure, and then peace-loving, gentle, compliant, full of mercy and good fruits, without favoritism and hypocrisy. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who cultivate peace." Okay, so the first question we need to ask ourselves is actually the same question we asked ourselves on Sunday that we did a really good job. What is wisdom? So, big question, right? What is wisdom? Actually, we had an awesome conversation over there and came up with several great definitions. But the one we're going to use tonight, correct, and actually we're going to be talking kind of about where that landed. So the way we're going to understand wisdom tonight in kind of a simplified, broken down version is that, I didn't actually change it up there yet, so this is what I was going to say. Look at all the big words. Wisdom is effective application of your knowledge. Too many words. Forget that. Wisdom is knowledge put to good use. Okay? Wisdom is knowledge put to good use. Right? So, has many of you guys ever tried to learn a foreign language, taken a class, done Duolingo, tried to teach yourself, one of those things? Okay, so most of, if not all of you guys understand what all goes into that. So you're having to, memorize a bunch of vocabulary, you're having to go through and figure out, okay, how do I conjugate these verbs? How do I make a sentence? How do I say the words? How do I hear and understand the words? So there's all this knowledge that you have to commit yourself to learning and internalizing, right? So you're getting all this knowledge. Now, imagine that you go and travel to a country where they speak that language. And you go and you start having full conversations with these people in their native language because of all the knowledge that you had learned. So you having conversations with those people, that's like wisdom. It's you taking your knowledge and you're putting it to good use. Not bad use, you're not using it poorly. That's how I use my Spanish. It's like, hola, ¿cómo estás? And now I'm exhausted. I have nothing else to say in Spanish. So I grew up in Texas, which is basically Mexico, so it's pretty embarrassing. Anyways, what, you never did? Yeah, whatever. Okay, so you need to make sure that the knowledge that you have not only is put to use, but is put to use with excellence, well, and that's what wisdom is. So what gets a little confusing in this passage that's all about wisdom is that James actually talks about two different kinds of wisdom. He talks about heavenly wisdom and earthly wisdom. That's the two main brackets that we're going to be looking at today. What's the difference between heavenly wisdom and earthly wisdom? So the first question we want to look at, first comparison point is, okay, what is each wisdom really about? Okay, so like, what is earthly wisdom about? What is heavenly wisdom about? So earthly wisdom, it says right there in, I didn't even bother writing it down. Earthly wisdom is based on the knowledge of the world. Okay, so you know the way that things are in the world. So in 1 Corinthians 3:19, another passage that talks about wisdom, Paul says, "For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God." So the wisdom that you can get from the things of this world, what the topic of all the knowledge that you learned that then became your wisdom, is all about the world, and it says that it's foolishness with God. So the most brilliant, wise people of this world, we talked a little bit about Bill Gates on Sunday, so people who are super successful in their field, regarded as brilliant geniuses, God looks at them and says, hey, compared to my wisdom, my knowledge, yours is just foolishness. So that should make us a little nervous. All the smart people in the room just got really uncomfortable, right? They're like, okay, I know a lot of stuff. Okay, back off. Okay. But this is what the Bible has to say about having an abundance of knowledge and wisdom about the world. It only gets you so far. However, heavenly knowledge, or heavenly wisdom, is based on the knowledge that you have about God. So let's look and see what Paul has to say again in this section. So in 1 Corinthians 2, 9 through 10, Paul says, "What eye did not see, and ear did not hear, and what never entered the human mind, God prepared this for those who love him. Now God has revealed these things to us by his Spirit." So what he's saying is that, you can get all this knowledge in the whole world, right? You can see everything there is to see. You can hear everything there is to hear. You can imagine things that don't even really exist. And he says, look, of all that stuff that you can see, hear, and imagine, there is even more that is God. There's so much more. And not just is God more than those things, but God also gives those things to the ones who believe in him. And he reveals it through his Spirit. So God in us reveals to us that truth. And so what kind of knowledge is God giving his people about himself? He is saying, look, from the beginning of time, I created everything. And I loved humanity. I created humans in my image to be a special part of creation. And when humans fell and sin entered the world, God says, I loved you so much that I wanted you to be restored to me. I wanted to have right relationship with you again, because we were walking hand in hand in the garden before, in perfect community, in perfect relationship, as creator and created being. Now there's a separation, and it's not right anymore. I can't be with the ones that I created to love me. You can't love me anymore. And so he put a plan in motion. He said, I'm going to send my son in the fullness of time. I'm going to send my son, who is God, to become a man, die on the cross, the death that each human should have died, so that instead of having the separation of sin, the sin is now paid for. So there's no more breakage. It's put back together, we're reconciled, we're made one with God again, so we can be in that relationship. And that's the knowledge that God shows us. He says, look, I love you. I made you. And you know what's incredible? He also tells us about himself. He said, look, not only did I do all this for you, this is our relationship, right? This is God to us. He says, look, I'm also going to show you that I am extremely powerful, the most powerful being who's ever existed. I am the most loving being that ever existed, and the only being that knows everything. And I want to be in a relationship with you. It's kind of like, I don't know, this might be a little bit surface level, but you ever seen like the nerdy dorky dude, walking around, whether it's in a TV show or in real life, walking around, and then he's just got this like incredibly like attractive girlfriend who's just like totally crazy about him, and you're like, whoa, she's way out of your league. What did you do to get her? That's like God in us, kind of, except we're not dating God. except that God's way out of our league and should never have ever wanted to be in any sort of relationship with us, right? We're like here. It's like me wanting to be friends with a mosquito. You know, something so small and so insignificant and so annoying to me because it does everything I don't want it to do. Or we've had lice in our house a few times because of preschoolers. I have zero love in my heart for lice because they're horrible little parasites that ruin everything. And yet God looks at us horrible little parasites that ruin everything, and he decides to love us anyways. And I definitely would never sacrifice a family member to save a population of lice, okay? It's just not happening. Bottom line. And yet God did anyways. So that is what the wisdom of heaven shows us and reveals to us. It shows us who God is, and it shows us our relationship with God. So now the next question we should look at is, okay, so where does heavenly wisdom and earthly wisdom, where do they come from? You know, what is the source, the origin of heavenly and earthly wisdom? So, earthly wisdom comes from a sinful and broken world. It says in verse 15 there, it says, such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, and demonic. Okay, cool. So definitely not related to God. Not that verse. You can go back one. I'm saving that one for later, guys. Don't get too excited. Okay, so that was verse 15 in chapter 3. It is earthly. You're like, okay, cool. There's lots of things that are earthly. That can't be too bad. It says, okay, it's also unspiritual. You're like, okay, unspiritual. We're getting a little more negative. And demonic. Ha! Okay, great. Demonic. Love it. Very contrary to God, right? So if you have exclusively wisdom from the world, and it's going to be demonic, unspiritual, earthly wisdom. However, wisdom that comes from heaven, heavenly wisdom, that comes from a perfect God, right? It doesn't come from a broken world. In verse 17 it says, but the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure. So pure, in this context, what this word means, it can also be translated as holy or sacred, undefiled. So this is not only perfect knowledge and wisdom from God, but it is even more importantly unstained by sin. So it's not subject to the brokenness that our world has. You know that no matter what happens around you, no matter what brokenness you suffer from in your life, that the perfect wisdom that comes from God is reliable and trustworthy and good. Now you can throw up that next verse. So if you remember back in James chapter 1, verse 5, he makes this statement about wisdom. He says, if anyone lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives to all generously and without criticizing, and it will be given to him. And he goes on after that to talk about how you should ask in sincerity, without doubting, that you should be completely believing that God is able and willing and desiring to give you that. Because he does. He wants you to know him. He wants you to obey him. He wants you to follow him because that's what he made us for. It's like if I was making something, so I cut those rooted letters back there the other day. I was testing out my new saw, and now it's in our youth room. I got a saw for Christmas. It was cool. That's what happens when you turn to a grown-up. You start getting power tools instead of video games. But I also got video games, so you win some, you win some more. So I made those letters. I cut them out. I stained them. I brought them here. Now imagine if I did all that, and then I put them on the wall, and then they just kept on falling off and decided that they wanted to go and play foosball. My wooden letters wanted to go play foosball. Who would have thunk? Who would have thunk? I didn't say I was wise. Okay, so that would be me making something, and then it wants to do something other than what I made it for. That's very frustrating to me as a creator over here. I wanted them to do that. I made them to do that. That was their whole purpose. The whole goal in life was for them to hang right there and look like wood on a wall. Very unfulfilling, I know. But God wants us to be in relationship with him. He wants us to love him because that's what we were made to do. We were made to give God glory. So, the last question we're going to look at tonight is, what does each wisdom look like? if wisdom is knowledge put to good use, what does it look like to put it to good use? So, earthly wisdom, if you look in chapter 3 there, it says in verses 14, it says, "But if you have bitter envy and selfish ambition in your heart, don't brag and deny the truth." So that's what characterizes a person who has earthly wisdom. They are motivated by envy and selfish ambitions. So their whole world completely revolves around them, right? So when I'm envious of someone or something, I look at what a person has and I say, wow, they really do have a lot of blank. And I wish I had a lot of blank. I hate the fact that they have it and I don't. I wish that they didn't have it. I hope something bad happens to them so that I can have that. That's what envy looks like. It's consuming, it's selfish, it's hateful, it's destructive, right? And then selfish ambitions, talk about self-explanatory. You want to see how that one's self-centered. Look at the first half of the word, selfish. Completely focused on your own ambitions, desires, the way that you think things ought to go, right? And if you're completely focused on your selfish ambitions, that means that it doesn't matter what anyone else's ambitions are, right? You're going to do whatever it takes to make sure yours happens, yours comes to pass. You will bury anyone that you have to in order to make that happen. But then, wisdom from heaven, it says in verse 13, is defined by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom, right? So it's defined by humility. And in fact, the humility that comes from wisdom. So how do you get humility from wisdom? Well, remember what the subject matter is, right? So what we're being taught about with our heavenly wisdom. What you are shown, what's revealed to you, what you experience is who God is and who you are in relation. So when you see how big, powerful, mighty, loving, perfect God is, and then you see yourself right next to him, it's like, oh, great. We are worms. You guys ever seen Hercules? It's like, we are worms. It's like that. So, when you recognize who God is and who you are in relation to him, you will be humble. Either that you're going to be humble or you're going to be in denial, right? Because if you are not letting the things that God has shown you, your belief in him, the reality of who he is, if you're not letting that impact the way you live your life, either your God is too small or you are too big. You think of yourself too big. No size shaming in this room. So the way that we're going to close it out today is by taking one last look at heavenly wisdom. So Michael's giving me the sad eyes over here. I said no size shaming, okay? One last look at heavenly wisdom. Another way that we could think of heavenly wisdom is to call it faith. So that's why this verse is up here. Hebrews 11:1 defines faith as, faith is the reality of what is hoped for, the proof of what is not seen. And I love the way that this translation says it in particular. This is how the Holman does it, but it says faith is the reality of what is hoped for. So that those beliefs that you have about who God is, the beliefs that you have about who Jesus is, what Jesus did for you on the cross, that begins to become your reality. Meaning, it impacts the way that you live day to day. It's not just something that you can say in your head, yes, I believe that, that's great, and then go living as if that's not the case. Faith requires a response of action, reality of what is hoped for, proof of what is not seen. And so that's really what it all boils down to with heavenly wisdom, right? If heavenly wisdom is really the knowledge of God put to good use, then how is that different from faith, right? You are going to be one who puts that into action. You're going to be living out humbly. The deeds that you do are going to reflect what you know to be true in your mind and your heart. But I know that there are several of us in this room who know a lot about God, who maybe know a lot about the Bible, know a lot of Bible stories, go to church often. You guys are all really great about coming super consistently. But he's here every Wednesday, man. I wouldn't call out somebody else when you miss half your Sundays, but Anyways, I know for a fact that some of you guys know all this stuff, and yet it does not impact the way that you live your lives. It's just the reality of the situation, that there is a lot of things that you will say with your mouth, confess to be the truth, but then the way that you live between Sunday and Wednesday, and then the second half of the week, Wednesday to Sunday, don't reflect that. And the reason that is because the only reason I can figure is because you have not experienced God's truth yet. The knowledge of God, the wisdom of heaven has not been shown to you yet. Because if you knew God, and I don't just mean know about God, if you knew God, your life would have to be changed. There's just no more. It's like when there's someone who lives on the beach, and they're just kind of doing their thing. They're in their little shack, right? They're in their beach house shack situation, and this dude comes running down in the middle of a storm. It's raining, just sheets, and he comes running over, he pounds on the door and says, "Man, you got to get out of here. A hurricane's coming." The person in his house is going to say, well, either there is a hurricane coming or there's not a hurricane coming. Right. And then the guy says, "Turn around and look at the giant hurricane that's right there. Now make your decision." The dude gets out of his house. He goes and he looks. Sure enough, there's a massive funnel hurricane coming directly for his house. He can't just go on living his life like the hurricane doesn't exist anymore. He has to make a decision, right? And any rational person is going to make the decision, hey, I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to react to this powerful force. And that's depends on how fast you run. That's the exact same thing with when you know that God is real and who God is, right? Because he's so big and he's so powerful and he's so mighty and he's so loving and he just wants to be in a relationship with you. Once you know that and you've experienced it, and it's not just words on a page, but it's what makes your heart beat faster, and it's what makes your palms sweat, and what makes you excited, and what makes you view the world differently. I mean, everything's going to change. You don't have an option anymore. It's the only response. So when you don't have that experiential wisdom, when you don't have the true knowledge and faith in God, then you become someone who has faith with no works. You become someone who's a hearer of the word only and not a doer of the word as well. And you become someone with no heavenly wisdom. And you can become as smart as you want. You know, you can go and learn everything that there is to learn in this world, but it's never, ever, ever going to replace that heavenly wisdom that'll make you a complete person, restore you with God to do what you were created to do, bring glory to God. And if you are sitting there and you feel really uncomfortable right now because you feel personally attacked, I'm going to tell you, I did not prepare this with any one of you in mind to attack you. That if you're feeling something, it's because the Holy Spirit is in you, convicting you right now, saying, yeah, he's right. Listen, I'm right here. It's me, God. Hello. And remember what James says back in chapter 1. He says, if any of you lacks wisdom, pray for it sincerely. You have to just desperately want it. You need it. And you pray, expecting fully that God is able to fulfill that, and he will give you wisdom. He is generous and will not withhold that from you. So, if that's you and you want to have a conversation later, you guys know after this we're going to go. We're just going to do free play, just hang out. I know for a fact that Alyssa, myself, Michaela, Emma, and John are all eager to have conversations if you have questions or concerns. So feel free to come up to any of us, pull us aside. There's 4 corners in the room. There's hallways, so just pull us aside and we'll have conversations. But that's all that I have for you guys tonight. I'm going to go and hang it up with a prayer, and then we'll get going.